the Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Welcome to Boundless Authenticity. If you've been a supporter of the show for a while, then thank you so much for your support. And if you're new, hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, we're joined by Mary Rodwell, one of the world's leading researchers into the UFO and contact phenomenon. Mary is the founder of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, where she's worked with thousands of experiencers to explore their encounters with non-human intelligences. She's the author of Awakening and the New Human, as well as the creator of award-winning documentaries on extraterrestrial contact. With a background as a nurse, midwife, counselor, hypnotherapist, and so many other things, including Reiki healing, Mary brings a rare mix of compassion, science, and open-minded exploration to this mysterious subject. Her work dives deep into the experiences of contactees, star children, and those who feel they're here to help humanity awaken to its cosmic heritage. From consciousness shifts to human evolution, Mary is here to challenge the limits of what we think is possible. Please visit maryrodwell.com.au. And I have so many questions. Are governments hiding the truth about UFOs? And why is humanity being chosen for a cosmic upgrade? Are extraterrestrials rewriting our DNA? What do skeptics get dead wrong about experiencers? Are aliens, guides, or manipulators? Is contact happening out there or inside our consciousness? Were humans ever fully Earthborn? Why are children reporting ET encounters? So much stuff. I'm hoping we can get to that tonight. How's it going, Mary?
Wow, you've got quite an agenda there, Johan, to be quite frank, but I'll do my best to answer some of them. I can't say I'm going to know something on all of it, but I'll do my best.
Well, I apologize for that because the more I talk to people, the less I know what is going on. And so this is where all these questions come from. I feel like a little child because I'm like, why that? Why this? What does that mean? You know?
Well, it probably means that you're a starseed yourself.
Probably. People have been telling me I'm an indigo child my entire life.
Well, that doesn't surprise me at all.
What role do you think children play in humanity's awakening? And why are so many of them experiencing contact?
It's a very good question. And I think that's why I was so driven to write The New Human, because what I was noticing was the parents that were having encounters, it was very likely and most likely that their children would be having encounters too, even if the parents weren't always fully aware of it. I believe these new upgrades of human, the new generations of human, are here with a pivotal role to help awaken humanity into who we really are and where we need to change this planet. And the evidence for that, again, I wrote about in The New Human, is their abilities to understand not only that they've come here with a mission, a purpose, they've come here with understanding of their connection to other intelligences, which we call non-human intelligences. Many of them are aware that they come from other places, other planets, or they've been part of incarnating from other planets with special abilities to help, if you like, activate and awaken humanity. So their role is a pivotal one. But to be honest, there's been starseeds coming to this planet for certainly hundreds of years, but more and more in numbers in recent times, as that is part of the role they have to awaken humanity to their true origins.
Some people claim that there's star children and that's evidence of evolutionary upgrades. So do you think that extraterrestrials are actively rewiring human DNA?
I think they're very much involved in humanity and have been right from the very beginning that Homo sapiens sapiens evolved onto this planet. And we know that there were ways that they evolved that were not natural in terms of intelligently designed. And this has come through many, many geneticists that have realized that there was no way Homo sapiens sapiens could have evolved without some kind of interference by some intelligent species. And I believe these intelligences, whether you call them, where they were known as gods, I think, in the past, but we now call them as non-human intelligences, actively altered the DNA, adding some of their own DNA as part of the upgrade of Homo sapiens sapiens. We gained 223 extra genes and twice the brain size without any way of that evolving naturally, for example. So there's a lot of scientific evidence. This isn't airy-fairy. This is absolutely the very real DNA information. And they've been monitoring us and assisting us, I think, to evolve over all millennia. And they've reached a point, I think, where they really are very actively involved now for the very reason that we've reached a certain technological advancement that if we're not careful, we're going to blow ourselves up. So we've got to, I put it a bit like, it's like giving a 3-year-old a loaded gun and they're not realizing that they can kill people. And they need now, and we need now, the consciousness to understand there's, it's very important for us to understand the consequences of our actions and to be spiritually evolved to know how best to deal with the technology that we have been given, or we have now reached a point of danger to ourselves and to other cosmic communities.
Can you go deeper on the science behind what you just said?
Well, there's a lot about the DNA anomalies in our that, you know, there are many, many different geneticists that have noticed the difference. And I remember one of them, Lloyd Pye, in one of his books before he died, with the Star Child skull that he was given that showed anomalies in the facial structure of this particular skull. And he got in touch with a particular geneticist who said, it's plainly obvious that we've been intelligently designed, he said, but if you try and say that in the scientific community, you're likely to be hung and drawn, basically hung from the nearest tree. So many have been very, very careful about mentioning the fact that they noticed these anomalies. We've got a number of, he isolated in his book, in his latest book about the Star Child skull, the numerous differences that were anomalies in the DNA itself, which I won't go into now. You need to go and look into it for yourself. The primary reason that it was interesting to me as an ex-nurse, I really wanted to know, okay, so where is the evidence? Because when I talk to those that are having contact, one of the things they need to help them with their experiences is to have as much validation and tangibility behind it as possible, because it's very hard for them to prove to others that there's something going on, because a lot of it is out of body. For example, when people go on board craft, we have the evidence, the survey evidence to show that 75% of encounters are out of body, for example. Only 25% is physical. So it's very hard to validate that and come to terms with it if you're an experiencer. But getting information that is tangible is really, really valuable. And one of them is the fact that they are aware that we are connected to these intelligences, which were previously called gods, the gods of old, which I believe were in fact non-human intelligences with technology that the locals thought was magic, and therefore they called them gods. I think we've got to get over the fantasy that many people want to believe in and realize that we've been visited by these intelligences. The main thing that's interesting about that is at least 12 different species were involved from the reports that we have by Command Sergeant Robert Dean, who was part of the disclosure before he sadly died in his 80s, who saw what the military knew about these intelligences, and he ended up recalling going on board the craft and being told 12 different species were involved in creating Homo sapiens sapiens. And they've been visiting and upgrading humans ever since to reach the point where we reach now. And they are very much involved in the contact when people are taken on board craft. They are told often that we're a hybrid species, and that the reason some of them feel very much they're a hybrid is because they have more of the ET DNA than others. So there's different levels of ET human DNA in all of us, and some relate more to being a hybrid or coming from another star system than they do feeling human. And they'll say, that they've been told they're a hybrid and maybe part Pleiadian, part human, for example, or part Arcturian or Orion, and have got an ET component added at the time of birth. And this is another part of the complexity of the program of upgrading humanity's consciousness.
I get the Pleiadian thing all the time.
So you connect to that.
Honestly, not really, but it seems to be a common thing. Everyone I talk to, they're like, "Oh, you're Pleiadian," and I just take it with a grain of salt. I figure if I'm supposed to connect with that, then one day I will.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things is when I work with people in hypnosis, and when they're in an altered state, you're tapping into their superconscious higher self. And often I'll ask them the question that they don't expect I'm going to ask. And that is, have you any connections to any particular star system where, in a previous existence, for example? And out of the blue, for many of them, they'll come out with something like Andromeda or Arcturus or Lyran or from another dimension, or, as you say, Pleiadian or Sirius or whatever. And when they come out of hypnosis, they are completely bowled over by the fact that they've come out with that, because that's not been something that's been in their conscious mind whatsoever. So there's a lot that we know on a deeper level that isn't conscious unless we tap into it. And that's what I've come across many, many, many times.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting, even though I don't personally identify with it. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just here to do the work. I could be red, purple, pink, I could be a bird person, whatever. And I still have to do everything that I need to do in order to push the evolution of consciousness forward and achieve what I feel really called to do. So labels don't matter to me, but if it works for others, then great,
I think it sounds like you're very focused on what your mission is and your purpose is, and that isn't important to you in the way it might be important to someone else to know more of their connections. Everyone has a different journey in trying to understand it and have different needs to help them validate what's actually in that knowing and that sensing of who they are and why they're here on the planet.
And I also think that in other regression sessions that I've been through, I've been to other planets. And so it's not a big deal to me anymore, So I think there's a lot to it for sure. There really is a lot to it. And it's all about what you want to do with it, right?
Well, it's for most people, the reason they contact me primarily is they've had experiences. Often they've not been listened to or believed. People are uncomfortable or fearful. So to have someone listen without the judgment is really important. The second thing is they may have incidents in their life which they can't explain, such things like missing time, or an experience where they've seen a craft and something unusual happened. And for many of them, they may wait many, many years before they get to a point where they say, I've got to find out what that meant and what happened then. Because often after those experiences, they change in the way they look at life. They may find they have new abilities and what have you, and they want to connect the dots. They want to understand more of what's going on in their life that they've never fully explored, to understand why they're motivated in certain ways, why certain things are important to them. So for many, it's trying to build up that picture of themselves and the reason why they're on this planet and what it is that they're meant to do or to know.
Going back to the part about extraterrestrial DNA, in light of this evidence, what does that actually mean for our deepest beliefs about God and spirit and humanity's place in the universe or universes?
Well, I think that's the big one that's going to be quite a shock to billions of people on this planet that have certain belief systems that are very much tied into the belief systems of planet Earth, religions, whether they believe their religion is accurate and a true understanding of the multidimensional, or whether or not they're scientific based and don't believe in anything at all. You've got this collection of beliefs about how they understand reality. And I think the hardest thing that's going to be for those individuals is to realize that much of what they've been taught to believe in, whether it's scientific, archaeological, spiritual, whatever, has been inaccurate. that in fact they've been told in many cases an edited version of the truth. And that's going to be very hard. And that's what a lot of experiencers that have had contact find. They start questioning everything because what they're experiencing is not the same as what they're being told to believe or whatever. I remember, and I wrote about it in The New Human, of a lovely Indian young man who wrote to me and told me he was a starseed. And he said, and my biggest problem is with my fellow countrymen, he said, and family and relatives, is we have about 100 gods in India, he said, and they think these 100 are gods, and I know that they're not gods. I know they're extraterrestrial, but I can't possibly tell them that they're extraterrestrials and they're actually worshipping extraterrestrials because they wouldn't understand, they wouldn't get it. And I think when disclosure really complete does happen, and it's happening probably a lot faster than the government wants in many ways, because people are coming out and speaking about their experiences. You're seeing all these craft in the skies now, and there's a lot going on there. The biggest thing is for those in a belief system that has seen these ETs as gods, are going to be in for an almighty shock, thinking, well, I've been worshipping something that wasn't a god after all. How does that feel? And there's going to be a lot of people very, very confused, very fearful. And as many experiencers find, they've got to start again in terms of building up what is reality. What can they trust? What can they believe in? How does that change the way that they live their lives? So it's going to be a huge shift in the way that they want to perceive the world. And some are going to be very angry that they will see as being misled and what have you. So there's going to be a lot of turmoil for quite some time until people start to reappraise that what they decide to believe is their reality and whatever. And I think we're headed for that, but it needs to happen. It's a bit like it's already happening with some of the things that are happening in the world already, in terms of their realizing how we're being manipulated across the planet by various agencies, let's put it like that. And people are starting to wake up and realize that there are people that are running this planet that aren't necessarily doing it for humanity's benefit, just for themselves. And I think that's a big shock to a lot of people, to think you can't trust certain agencies that you believed you could trust, whether it's governments or whether or not it's religions and people in them, or whether or not it's the science fraternity who also lie, So it's going to be a very big, difficult shift for many people.
I should say, in my opinion, I don't think any real authentic disclosure will come from governments, simply because of how many people are openly talking about this topic right now. And I think that as a result of the open conversation that everyone else is choosing to have on the side, outside of mainstream voices, the government just kind of has these moments every once in a while where they are sweating profusely and they adjust their tie and they swallow really hard and they throw you a blurred image of something and they say, oh yeah, there's UFOs out there. And then they distract your attention back to something else, almost as if they're in denial that they have lost as much influence as they have,
I think you're absolutely right. And I've been in this field of supporting people with this understanding over nearly 30 plus years. And, I've seen little change in their attitude to what's happening in the skies. And they're supposed to be given an ultimatum, from what I understand, of various of these intelligences to disclose it now, but they're still controlling the narrative and still trying to say they don't really know what they are or who they are or whatever, when they have known for almost a century, in fact, that we've been visited and they've had interactions with them. I think there's two things that my angst goes to in terms of this truth embargo. One of them is that I think everyone has the right to know the truth about our origins and who we are and our place in the universe anyway. That should be a human right. But the fact that you've got millions, possibly billions of people that have had experiences that have been totally denied by mainstream understanding because of the truth embargo, that they've ended up in medicated or in hospital simply because they talked about their experiences and what have you, and not being believed, and lived in isolation and fear. And secondly, all the technology that has been hidden from us, that could have transformed this planet for 100 years, saved it from pollution, saved it from people dying of starvation and what have you. We could have been now in space, traveling to other planets, experiencing the whole gamut of what our cosmic cousins are doing. And all of that's been denied us because of a few people, self-serving people, that have decided to keep all this technology and this awareness to themselves. And that is a crime against humanity in every sense.
I feel like asking a George Nuri-esque question. Like, he just throws his hands up and he says, well, will the aliens ever land?
Oh, I think they've been given the comeuppance in governments now. If they don't, they're going to land anyway. I think we're very close to that. Certainly, I believe disclosure is coming from the ground up, because there are so many people now that are feeling confident to actually start talking about their experiences, and haven't done often. Some of them have been in their 60s, 70s and 80s and had extraordinary experiences, but now want to talk about it. It's almost like now is the time for people to actually own their truth. And I think that whether the government wants it or not, it's out of their hands. I think these intelligences have had enough.
You've worked with thousands of experiencers, and we are clearly witnessing a mass awakening and mass contact. Is this phenomenon a byproduct of consciousness that is more open or receptive, or is this just happening amongst random people, and it doesn't matter, how elevated they might be, just to use that word?
My understanding from talking to so many of these really aware souls that are having a dual existence, if you like, because many of them recall being taken to other planets in this lifetime, going, even flying spacecraft, being involved with these intelligences in a very deep level in their consciousness. I believe this is what's happening now, is that the collective consciousness of humanity has reached a point of no return in terms of what needs to happen for us to shift in understanding of our true potential. I think that we've been limited by many things on this planet, deliberately held back from accessing higher consciousness. And what's happening now, it's being triggered by multiple different things to activate that awareness that we have enormous potential way beyond any technology that they're trying to force on us at the moment. That's, supposedly giving us superpowers, when you've got children and they speak to me of some of their experiences, which are quite extraordinary. When you talk to a 7-year-old that tells you that he can go to other planets, and he goes through a portal, and he just has to know the mathematical number of the planet, and he can go through a portal in the runes, for example, is one example of their ability. I talked to a 7-year-old who calls herself a hybrid. She says that she's part blue avian, part human. She speaks star language, and she also says that she can heal people and activate the healing in them as well when she does the healing. So we're talking about children coming in with skills, awareness, understanding of their abilities and what they can achieve, and how they can activate that in others. So what's happening is, I believe, that there are many different frequencies coming to this planet now that are activating dormant DNA and activating all this awareness that these children, for example, are coming in awake Many of them know their past lives, for example. They're already awake, and also awake to the truth. They're awake to seeing what's really going on. They can tell when someone's lying to them. They are able to understand. Many of them are telepathic, and this is coming out more and more. And those are some of the abilities of these children that are being given terms or labels such as ADHD or autism or dyslexic or even bipolar, are really new forms of an awakened human that are still not fully understood. And that's what I talk about, is that they've got special skills. They've found with the autistic children, in many cases, Dr. Diane Powell in the telepathy tapes has discovered that autism, the autistic child, is often telepathic, and they communicate with each other. And I've met parents with autistic children that say they communicate with them through telepathy, and they are able to understand each other. These are abilities that we all have, but have not been able to access. And I believe the frequencies that are coming, the languages and codes that people are downloading, called star language, are all part of the frequencies that are activating DNA. And ultimately, we will all be changed by that. Everyone will be affected in different ways, depending on their level of acceptance and awareness from a soul level. And that's what's literally happening right now. We're all activating each other. I mean, Johan, with what you're doing, you're sending out these frequencies, this understanding that's activating people. That's part of the mission, plainly, that you've got, and that you're doing a wonderful job, because everyone who gets activated is activating those around them. Even if they're not aware of it, they're being activated. And this was the whole thing to do with DNA and the dormant DNA, which always intrigued me, is we only have an understanding of what 5% of our DNA is doing. The rest, they used to call it junk litter, that it was junk DNA. They never understood it. Well, the truth is that they found that 1 gram of DNA can contain enough information of everything that's on the internet in 1 gram of DNA. Just imagine what we don't know about our own DNA and what's there for us to access when we get activated. And I think this is what's happening now. It's unstoppable, because it's already happening, and it's growing and it's growing. And that's why people are changing and waking up, because that's all part of what needs to happen for us to create a better world, a world where we can be what we've incarnated to be, living joyous, beautiful lives, understanding that we're all connected.
What are some ways that the authorities, so to speak, are deliberately suppressing our consciousness and stopping contact with various beings?
Oh, there's many ways that they're doing it. And I think the primary one is to use, the CIA coined a term, conspiracy theorist. It was something they coined to actually, if you like, mock people who are questioning the narrative and the critical thinkers. It's a very good way of doing it. The other thing that people don't know is that there are abductions that are not done by ETs at all, but are done by the military. They're called MyLab. And what they do with those is they abduct people that have had real experiences, take them underground, and they interrogate them and drug them and scare them, so that they get as much information out of them as possible, but also make sure that they're so terrified they never talk about it or they'll never be believed. So there's a whole underground program of shutting down those that are having real experiences. And I wrote in the New Human of a 9-year-old, it explained to me that he'd been taken underground, that he'd been sat in a chair with a woman with a black uniform on, and she had technology to one side of her. And that what that technology was doing was trying to lower his frequencies and reprogram his awareness. And he said, I was aware of it, he said, so I kept my frequency too high for her to do that. So they're not just doing it to one child, they're doing it to, who knows, millions potentially or whatever. So that's one of the ways that I learned to understand the difference between those that have real ET experiences, but the ones that have also had MyLab, because the MyLab ones are often the most terrifying. And it's And it's very hard to say that because no one wants to think that this is humanity doing this to, this is man doing this to man. But whether we like it or not, there are agencies on this planet that certainly are not humanity's friend. And really, that's part of the problem. So everything that we look at, from media, programming, edited science, edited archaeological discoveries, everything has been compromised deliberately to keep us as humans fully aware of who we are, what our potential is, and our true history, our true legacy.
You talk about activation. Trauma leaves these imprints and these clues during a person's regular waking consciousness. What are some subtle signs that any person can look for that indicate that they might have been a part of the secret space program or MyLab?
Well, the feeling that they're being watched, monitored, is part of it. Inconsistencies in their memories, lack of awareness of certain times in their life. But although that can also echo to a certain extent having contact experiences, because many of those who have contact don't have a good memory of their childhood. The other indicators, and I've got a questionnaire on my website, or I can send to people, which is other things like, and I'm not talking now about MyLab necessarily. I think MyLab is an offshoot of those that are having experiences. So that can be mixed in with the contact, feeling that you don't belong here, that this isn't home, that you don't understand humanity. You often feel like you've been adopted, are all feelings of an experiencer having contact. But on top of that will be trauma or fear of certain things that may indicate more has been going on in your life than you think. There is a sense too that for many that have had MyLab, they've been in a family where there's been a military background. It seems to be that the ones they pick for these programs are often military parents. The father has been in the military, for example, so they have access to the military children. And that's how they are. I think in many cases, when those that have had MyLab, I find out that they've had, their father, even their grandfather or their mother in the military, in some military base somewhere. And they've had strange experiences where they've been taken out of classrooms. And not all the children have been taken out of the classroom and taken to have special lessons, for example. And they've never quite understood why they had those special lessons or what went on, for example. So that's a whole new, different part of the reality. And I'm not an expert by any means. I only primarily work with those that have had contact experiences. If they've been very, very traumatized, I may find they've also had MyLab as well, alongside, what I call the real ET experience, which is often very different. I wrote the foreword for a book by Naira Isley, beautiful soul, who was in the military. She was in radar, and she wrote Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light. And she came to the understanding through body work that activated her memories of being taken underground by military and interrogated, drugged, raped, and basically traumatized, deeply traumatized over many years. And what was interesting was when I worked with her, we looked at the sort of spiritual side of her mandate, and what she discovered was that she had agreed as a soul to incarnate into human form, experience the MyLab, and then write about it to expose it. And that was her job. So the reason she experienced it was to so that she could actually expose it to humanity. And that's what she did. But she'd had also real ET experiences as well, where she found out her star origins, and why she had agreed to do that was to expose it. And I think many of those that have had the MyLab or part of the secret space program, I think obviously on a soul level, there's been a reason why that's been undertaken. It seems to be in most cases a soul agreement. When I've taken someone into hypnosis and in that space, they may be having medical procedures or other things, being taught things. And I'll say to them, have you on any level consented? On any level consented? And most of them will say, yes, but before I came here as a soul. So there's, it's looking at, for the individual, they're looking and seeking answers to their own experiences so they can connect the dots. And for some, that helps explain why they would go through sometimes very fearful or scary experiences because of the mandate of exposure and informing the public more of what else is actually going on behind the scenes.
Okay, so going into the concept of being a soul given consent to have an experience on Earth, what are the mechanics of that and what does it usually sound or look like?
Well, often if somebody wants to go into why they've incarnated on the planet, they're either initially through the hypnosis, they might go to an experience where they meet one of their genetic ET parents, for example, and they may be introduced to that ET parent on board craft, and they may be shown, it could be anything from a tall zeta, mantis, it could be a blue being, it could be a range of different forms, and they say that part of their genetics was where they came from. So that, let me give you an example of that. I was talking to a 10-year-old some years ago now, and he said that he came from a planet that was blue. Sorry, he was blue in form. And when he came from this planet, this is his first incarnation as a human. And he said he picked a mum that had been to this planet a number of times, so she knew how it all worked on planet Earth. And he said, and his job, amongst many, he was a center seed connecting to the center of the planet. And his job is to help with the pollution of this planet. So many of them that want to, and some have conscious memory of this, like he does. It's not hypnosis. They realize they brought certain gifts to this planet to help with its recovery, if you like. And they have a certain mandate. And this isn't hypnosis, this is conscious recall. If they're older, they may need to go back into that state, to their subconscious, superconscious, and ask the question, which they can do, of that part of themselves, is where do I come from? What was my mandate? What gifts did I bring to this planet? And it can be extraordinary, some of the things that come up that they had no conscious recall of, but their superconscious has. And for some people, that's what they need to do. It's just like going into, a past life, as many people can also do that and find out they may have several lives on this planet or on other planets, which one was quite interesting, of a young graphic designer many years ago. He said, I'm seeing myself as a kind of grey being, he described with 4 digits, typical kind of zeta kind of grey being. And he said, we're moving something big from one dimension to the other. And he said, it's a planet. And we've moved it too quickly and we've messed up its energy. So we've now got to rectify that. So he was talking about using literally moving planetary bodies from one dimension to another. I mean, extraordinary. This is many, many years ago. So what I learned from a lot of the stories that even now are quite extraordinary in many cases is there is so much that is hidden within our DNA that we can access, that give us more of our history, our understanding of our soul journey and what we're here for. And often that gets revealed at a time we most need it to help us make sense of why we're here. A lot of people say, what on earth am I doing here? I don't feel like I'm achieving anything. What is the purpose of my role here? And often it's like anything, it unfolds as you're ready for it, and the task is ahead of you. I know that a lot of people come to me and say, I've got a mission, but I don't know what it is yet. I don't know whether I'm following my mission or whatever. And I say, my favorite comment to that is, your soul isn't going to let you miss the bus. You know, ultimately, it's going to make sure that you know what you've come here to do, but it might not yet reveal itself until the right time. And that's what seems to be happening right now, is many people in the last few years, particularly after this last, I've got to be very careful about what I say here, the last few years, let's put it like that, and what has been imposed on humanity, that's been a very big wake-up call for a lot of people in a positive way, because what it's done is expose the lies and the disinformation and the propaganda that has been going around the planet, and people are waking up to that. So it's actually been, in many cases, for many people, a big wake-up call, and they've completely changed the way they look at life and what's important. So something very major is going on, and it's all happening simultaneously. And it gives me great hope for humanity, because I think something very special is going on.
So often we hear about ETs and they're benevolent guides to some, they're just neutral observers, or they could be manipulating humanity. Is it all of the above in your experience?
I think to a certain extent we could say that, but I will go to the survey that was done by the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, which I was one of the founders, along with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Ray Hernandez, and Dr. Rudy Shield. The survey was done with over 4,200 individuals globally, 600 questions. No other survey has been done like it. And two very important parts of that survey were, there were so many in-depth questions. It's something I can send you, the PDF. It's available freely to people who want it. Beyond UFOs, it's called. The survey, two important points. One of them was that 85% of those surveyed had a psycho-spiritual transformation in a positive way. So whatever you want to make of people and their interactions, somehow or other, it ultimately, for most people, was a very beneficial, positive, life-changing experience. 15% still were in fear, and my suspicion with those is many of them had been exposed to my lab and probably the darker side of what's happening. I can't prove that, but I suspect that's because that's what I found when I run experiencer groups. I would always find the most traumatized were the ones that were under a program called the My Lab program and were severely traumatized. So 85% psycho-spiritual transformation, where they looked at life completely differently, left materialistic values behind, wanted to live more simply, cared about life, cared about the connection to each other, became healers or wanting to do something good for humanity. So that is the outcome. So that tells you something about what these interactions convey. The other thing that I think is really important here is that 75% of those that had contact, it was out of body, not physical. So we only had 25% that were physically taken, but in many cases their consciousness was what went on board the craft and inhabited often other forms. And I can explain that a little bit, like one little 9-year-old explained to me that when he goes on board craft, sometimes he evaporates into a mantid form, which is like his ancestors. So he'd go into that form on board the craft. And I have many instances where people will say they will go on board craft into another form or another container, if you like, biological container, to do certain tasks, and they would leave that. I remember one young lady saying, as I said to her, well, where's your human body? And she said, oh, it's just like over there waiting for me. And I said, so how do you get back into your human body? And she said, she described a ball of light leaving the other form and reanimating her human form. So that is part of an understanding that we are doing a lot more perhaps in our sleep than we realize, and we're being visited or visit these intelligences, and we're often part of them on some level, on some soul level as well. That's why for some people it's really important for them to know their connections to other star systems, because that's what they relate to, is relate more to that than they do being human. And that helps them understand why they feel so different to other people, why they don't feel like they belong. And often they'll say, I just want to go home. I don't like it here. I don't like planet Earth. I don't like it. I want to go home. Because part of them knows that this isn't home for them. And interestingly, in hypnosis, for some of them, when they've been very depressed on planet Earth, they've often been taken back to their home planet at night and given a bit of a reprieve, a bit of a holiday, just to rebalance them and get them to accept the fact that, well, at the moment, part of their mission is planet Earth, and then bringing them back. Because some of them said, I was so depressed, and then I went to bed one night, and somehow something happened, and the next day I felt okay again. So they're often taken for a bit of a holiday. I've made the joke a few times that I feel like I'm a headmistress of a boarding school called Earth, and that the students are saying to me, I want to go home, I don't like this school or whatever. And I'm sort of saying, well, actually, you've agreed to come here for the term, so I'm sorry you can't go home yet. But it feels a bit like that, that it's very difficult for some of these very high-level, advanced souls to come to this planet, but to bring their skills to help this planet a very crucial point. But it's very hard. This density is very hard for them.
How do we tell the difference between authentic contact and psychological projection, if you will? And what are skeptics frequently getting wrong about experiencers?
Well, that's a good question. I've been asked it a number of times about people that perhaps are wanting to believe that that's relevant for them and it's their experience when maybe it isn't. First of all, I'll use the very pragmatic one, is for most people have gone to a lot of trouble to access me, to talk to me about their experiences. Some of them have traveled many miles, many kilometers. They may have come from another country to see me or whatever. And I say to the media when I say that, do you think they'd waste all that money coming to see me and tell me their experiences if it isn't true? Because I'm not going to make them famous. I'm not going to give them money for it or whatever. They're just going to get answers. So it doesn't make any logical sense for someone to do that anyway. When you take somebody into hypnosis, you can't hide your experience or make it up. Some say, oh, well, I can fantasize or whatever. I'll quote Dr. John Mack, the Harvard professor of psychiatry, who did many, many hypnosis after doing the psychological testing. And he said that the information that comes out in hypnosis is often far more accurate than conscious memory, because in conscious memory, we edit information, whereas in hypnosis, you don't edit, you just run the tape and it explains exactly what's actually going on. So it's more actually accurate. Why would have I met anyone that I felt was making up? Actually, I don't think I have, because for most people, it's not like I'm going to make them famous. What are they going to get out of it other than, okay, so she believes me? What else are they going to get from that? Nothing. But I do know that some have ended up in hospital because they've been dealing with this and nobody's believed them, because sometimes their experiences are quite extraordinary. And if they talk about it to the wrong people, then it's just seen as paranoia or some kind of fantasy-prone individual or whatever. So sometimes they have been mentally disturbed, and I can tell the difference if someone's not handling it very well. And there's been a few that haven't handled their experiences very well because of what's happened in their lives and the other traumas, and they have become very disturbed. And I don't work with anyone in terms of their ET experiences if they're dealing with other things that are happening in their lives that they're not handling very well, because I say you need to focus on your human life right now not your ET stuff, because it's too much for you. You want to get yourself stable, you want to get yourself balanced, and you want to get grounded. And that's happened a few times where I've advised them to go and get other help to help them with their everyday human existence, and not to get too carried away with all the other stuff that's going on, because that just makes it even more complicated and difficult for them to handle.
We always hear about whistleblowers, but they don't often give information that resonates on a frequency of truth. Are there any authentic voices out there that you recommend?
Oh, I'd have to be very careful here. I agree with you. I think some are planted whistleblowers. I think and if it's endorsed by the government right away, I'm suspicious. There are some whistleblowers that I've met. David Adair, for example, I trust him implicitly. I think, the rocket scientist, all that he said about what's going on, I've met him a number of times. We've had dinner and whatever. Robert Salas is another one who was at the military facility where the craft was seen outside the military facility and basically affected the nuclear warheads and what have you. Absolutely. I believe Larry Warren, the Rendlesham Forest one, is a true whistleblower. I think he's been maligned. I would say he's telling the truth as far as anyone can. So there are those that I think have integrity, and I believe they have integrity. There are some out there that are, make a big name for themselves. And I notice when somebody big notes themselves, I have a real problem with that, because when you start seeing ego coming in the way, and that always worries me when they start to believe their own spin. But I've met the Defence Minister of Canada, Paul Hellyer, before he died. I met him and had lunch with him. Wonderful man and absolute integrity. Those kinds of individuals. I think what's great about starseeds in many cases is they've got a good BS meter. And generally when they listen, does it feel right to you? Does it, we're having to trust that intuition, that feeling, that knowing. Does it feel right, And look at their behavior, and what they're sharing. And you have to, in the end, trust your instincts. But there's a few that I've just mentioned that I would absolutely trust as having integrity.
Well, thanks for that. Integrity is key. And that's a great place for people who are unfamiliar to start looking more into this phenomenon. So one final question. You mentioned things being imposed on humanity. Will the ETs help us if digital ID and enslavement is implemented, for example?
I think they're already helping us. They're helping us by many of them incarnating into human form to change the system. And so when they say, are they going to come down and land and fix it, they've already been working with bringing in souls that have the abilities to change the system. So although we may very well end up with craft and more physical contact for people, there are many out there, starseeds, that are very much part of that system of change on the planet, and starseeds and whatever, as well as there are ETs out there that are human, that look human, but are actually ET, and they're roaming the planet as well. So, you could be meeting somebody or seeing somebody standing there by the library, and that could very well be an ET, a humanoid ET or whatever as well. So they're amongst us already. There are also souls that are connected to them. But I think that we are being helped on multiple levels to turn back the tide of these very dark agendas and what have you. Some seem to suggest that we're splitting up into sort of two densities, that we're going, some are staying with the 3D reality and have chosen as a soul to experience the 3D with all of that as an agenda, and others that are going to move into the new earth, which is a different density, a higher density. and they're going to reach their full starseed potential. That may happen. Some say the new earth is already waiting for those enlightened souls to be ready to ascend into that new earth. It could be that. I don't know. I feel that there are lots of people vacating the planet at the moment through what's happened, and maybe that they want to have a new experience on a new earth, and they've already just left a bit sooner than the rest of us. Who knows? It's the soul journey, isn't it?
Well, Mary, what do you get when you cross an elephant and a rhino?
Go on, tell me.
Elephino.
Oh, I like it. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about this topic. I don't know anything, and like I told you at the beginning, the more I hear, the less I understand, but it makes that curiosity burn even brighter. So I encourage any listeners to be curious. Curiosity is a major form of love, at least it is for me. And Mary, thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast. Can you tell us where we can find you once again?
Oh, my websites are up there on Google. You just have to Google my name and you'll find, the different websites and what have you. I'm on Facebook, Telegram as well, and Messenger if you need to contact me. And acern.com.au or maryrodwell.com.au. Any of those will find me. And I can, if you have questions or anything, by all means, get in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality. Whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean? All of the questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity podcast.